Coming up on this episode, the Warriors have had an impressive 7-1 start to the new NBA season, but should that only increase their exploration for a potential blockbuster trade? And what about Giannis Antetokounmpo? How could the Warriors get in that conversation if the two-time MVP asks out following Milwaukee's disastrous start to the season? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. This time, 24 hours ago, the Warriors were in the midst of their most impressive win of the season, a 118-112 victory over the Boston Celtics at TD Garden. And the victory has certainly legitimised the Warriors' start to the season. Now 7-1, 5-0 on the road, which is the first time they've gone 5-0 on the road to start a season since the historic 73-9 season in 2015-16. Now, it has rejuvenated somewhat the idea of whether or not this team needs a trade and whether or not, one big move could push them over the edge, whether this team as is a legitimate threat in the Western Conference. Plenty of talk about that following what they did in the offseason, obviously, and of course, in the middle of this 7-1 start ahead of a matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers tomorrow. Now, Brian Windhorst on NBA Today came out earlier and said this in regard to the Warriors and a potential blockbuster move before the February 6th mid-season trade deadline. He said, they may not want to do anything with this roster because it's so good, but the Warriors are the biggest candidate in my mind to make a big trade. They tried to trade for LeBron James last trade deadline, and they tried to trade for Paul George, and they tried to trade for Larry Markin. And this is a team that's got an itchy trigger finger trying to make a big deal, an itchy trigger finger trying to make a big deal. I think that was the most notable point there at the end. There was a couple of people in my live stream yesterday after that win over the Celtics who were saying that no, there shouldn't be any big trade, that this roster is currently showing itself capable, and that any potential trade could ruin the chemistry and the good vibes that the Warriors have going, which there's no doubt about that. There's a great feel, a great sense around the Warriors right now, not just within the way they're playing, but how they're the chemistry off the court and stuff like that with the new additions, the younger players meshing with the veterans. There is some good stuff going on. There's no doubt about that. I would actually almost go the other way with this and say that, okay, this is almost the perfect time to explore a big trade. Now, the reason I say that is because, first of all, you've got to ask yourself, is this team capable of winning the championship this season? Okay, that's obviously the ultimate final question that you've got to ask yourself, and what Mike Dunleavy Jr., Joe Lake, whoever else will be asking themselves. At the moment, I still don't think so. I'm going to have to see a lot more from this squad to be putting them in legitimate title contention. Now, do they look right now a legitimate playoff team in the West who, won't even be involved in the play-in tournament, will be able to secure a top 6 seed? Yeah, absolutely. They can do that. They can be a top 6 seed in the West and secure a playoff berth. Could they win a playoff series, maybe even 2? Yeah, possibly. Possibly. That's how deep this squad is. You get a bit of luck with, injury and stuff like that. Who knows what can happen? But in terms of beating your OKC to get out of the West, facing the Celtics potentially in the finals where they're likely to have Jaylen Brown back, Kristaps Porzingis, from what the team we saw yesterday. So can they beat those teams? I still have my question marks simply based on the lack of star power. Now, I think the league has moved away from having, 3 legitimate all-star players and, the potential super teams that we've seen over the last decade. But I still think you need 2 legitimate stars to win an NBA championship. And the Warriors don't have that at the moment. It's really interesting that I, coming into this season, thought, okay, well, to be good, to get off to a great start like they have, they're going to need one of their young players to really start blossoming and looking like a star. And obviously, Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski were the 2 players who you looked at and thought, okay, those are the guys that could potentially develop into those players. Well, the funny thing about this, the Warriors starting 7-1, is that I'd argue that Kuminga and Pods have been 2 of the more disappointing players on the Warriors over the first 8 games. Now, they haven't been bad by any means. Like, Pods has still got an unbelievable, I'm not sure if he still leads the league or very close. At one point after 5 games, he was leading the league in plus minus. So still very effective, but not shooting the ball well whatsoever. The scoring still probably hasn't come on like we might have hoped. And then Kuminga obviously had a disappointing first 3 games, then was demoted to the bench, has been very good since that, but obviously moving to the bench was less than ideal for him, and I think less than ideal for us as fans who were believing that JK was going to take the next step, be a legitimate starter, play 30-plus minutes a night on this team. That hasn't necessarily developed into being the case so far. So without that second star, I still question where this team can get to in terms of making the Western Conference Finals or winning an NBA championship. And we've been very lucky over the past decade that we've had so many good teams that was, an elite team that's won 4 NBA championships. And therefore, that's kind of the expectation when you've still got Steph Curry. And we saw what Steph was able to do yesterday, 27, 7, and 9 against the Celtics. We saw what he did going back to the offseason with Team USA at the Olympics. He is still one of the top 5 to 10 players in the league. And therefore, you've got one of those guys. It should be not necessarily championship or bust, but the expectation is that you should be able to make a deep playoff run, right? And I think anything less than, I think ideally, getting back to the West Finals, anything less than that, and you're going to have a lot of conversation about, could the Warriors have done more to get further and help Steph reach, I'm not saying win another championship, but reach a point again where he's got a legitimate shot of trying to get the Warriors back to the NBA Finals or, winning a championship or at least getting to the Western Conference Finals, whatever it may be. It's like, okay, one playoff series win, making the playoffs and one playoff series win, that's not necessarily going to cut it for Steph. And therefore, it shouldn't necessarily cut it for us as fans. So, yes, it's an impressive start, 7-1. Couldn't really have gone any better right now. But at the end of the day, it's about the pointy end of the season come April, May, and what the team can do at that point. And you've got to ask yourself, okay, can this team as currently constructed do that? I still have my question marks, which means that they should still be exploring a big trade, which by the sounds of it from Brian Windhorst, I think that could still be well and truly on the cards ahead of the February trade deadline. The other thing about their position right now and why it's actually not a bad time to actually explore a trade is that I think during the offseason, there was a sense of desperation somewhat in terms of the Warriors, looking at the Warriors roster and thinking, oh, you know what, there may be just a playing team. They'd be battling even just to make that. They'd be battling just to make the playoffs. They really desperately need to get Steph a second star. And therefore, that gives teams leverage in negotiations, right? The Warriors can come out and, and they have come out and said, we're happy with our team, all this stuff. But ultimately, teams will know that, okay, if you've got Steph Curry and you're really only around the play-in mark and you're battling just to make the playoffs, then you're going to be pretty desperate to upgrade your team and make your team at least a legitimate playoff team. Now, Mike Dunleavy Jr. has come out and said before the season that, we're not going to make a move, a blockbuster move, just to take ourselves one step further kind of thing and not be an average team at best kind of thing, which I think a lot of us as fans, me included, looked at that and thought, geez, okay, well, if you're thinking that one big move is only going to make us an average to good team, then what do you think about the team right now? Which is interesting because now they've obviously come out and they're 7-1. But the real question is, again, are they capable of doing more than just making the playoffs, winning a playoff series? And I don't currently think so. And right now, given the situation they're in at 7-1, you actually look at it and think, well, they could go into trade negotiations and not appear as desperate as what they were before the season. Because right now they can sit back and think, okay, well, you know what? We don't have to make a trade right at this second, right? We've got some buffer here. We're 7-1. We can actually probably afford to, lose a couple of games here. We don't have to make a trade tomorrow because our season's going down the toilet. We don't have to do that. We can wait. We can be patient. We can wait right up until, the Warriors keep going how they're going, right? They'll get to the February 6th trade deadline and they'll be, 10, 15 games above 500, hopefully. And they're in a good playoff position. They look headed for the playoffs. And you think, okay, well, if we can't get a blockbuster trade done, at the very least, we're still a playoff team, right? And therefore, there's not that outward desperation that the Warriors are going to, they're going to try their best not to appear desperate at any point. But when you can back that up with your record, right, and you can go to other teams and other teams can see, oh well, you know what, they're actually a playoff team anyway. then that does help you massively in trade negotiations. The other thing is just in terms of the current value of individual players. And some of these guys that have actually just increased their value in a trade perspective based on the first 8 games of the season. Now, Kuminga and Podziemski maybe not so much, but I think Podziemski still has a lot of value. Kuminga is obviously the interesting one in terms of his contract situation. His value's probably declined a little bit, which is a bit of an issue, but we'll get into that. But then other guys, like even rotation guys like, GP2 and Looney, like they don't have huge value, but they're not negative assets by any means. Like they've, from coming into the season thinking, those guys might be done as rotation players. No, like those guys are playing against the Boston Celtics at TD Garden, helping you to a win in the final 3-4 minutes of the game, like on the floor, making key plays. Like they are legit rotation players, right? Buddy Hield. Like, has Buddy Hield's value ever been any higher? Now, I think a lot of people would look at it and think, maybe it's just the Warriors. Maybe it's just playing next to Steph. Maybe it's just in the Steve Kerr system, all these kind of things that are, and there's no doubt about that are helping Buddy Hield to what he's doing right now in terms of, 20 points a game on 50% three-point shooting. It's been unbelievable. But he would his value's certainly gone up, and particularly when you look at his contract and his 4 years at $37, $38 million with some non-guarantees and a player option in there as well in the 3rd and 4th years. So, he's got some value. I think Melton, when he comes back, he's going to have value. And a lot of these are expiring contracts as well when you think about Melton, Looney, Payton. Kyle Anderson's on a reasonable contract. Wiggins is the big one because now you could look at Wiggins and think, if he's going to come back and be doing this, then all of a sudden he's not a negative asset anymore. And he's actually a positive asset in a trade. And as sad as it is to think about, because Wiggins had a great start to the season, even yesterday, didn't shoot the ball that well, but still impacting defensively, still being aggressive. I've loved what Wiggs has done so far across the course of the first 8 games, albeit he missed a couple as well. But the thing is, if the Warriors want a player that is $30+ million, especially $40+ million, like a Giannis Antetokounmpo, then unless you're willing to trade Draymond Green, which I don't think will happen, then it's got to be Andrew Wiggins involved in the trade. It has to be, right? And that's unfortunate based on how he's playing right now, but it's also a good thing that he's playing well because he's rehabilitating his value. And he's no longer a player that teams will look at and think, well, no, hang on, you're actually going to have to give up assets in order to get off his contract. Now it's he if he's going to play like this, if we get another 20, 30 games of this, it's okay, he's a legit asset. Not huge value by any means, but you can throw him in a trade and teams aren't going to ask for extra assets to take on the deal. It's not a bad contract by any means. In fact, when he signed that deal, we all thought it was a good contract, a team-friendly contract, and slowly he's starting to get back to that, right? To being a team-friendly deal rather than one where a lot of teams think and believe that's one of the worst contracts in the league and that you'd have to give up assets to get off it. Starting to prove that that's not necessarily the case. So I think he's actually the big one here because he would have to be the major salary matching piece in a trade for any player that's making really 30+. Because once you get to $30+ million now, maybe, for a $30 million player, I don't even know, who would be available at around that price necessarily, but maybe at that point you could make a 3-for-1 trade where it's like Looney, Payton, Kyle Anderson, you can nearly get to $30 million with those 3 guys, or Kuminga's making 7.6, so maybe get into that. You could, for a $30 million player, you could probably figure it out while keeping Wiggins and Draymond. But for anything more than that, it's no, it's going to have to be Wiggins involved in the deal. Now, if you can go out and you can get Giannis Antetokounmpo from the Bucks, who have started the season deplorably, 1-6, then you've got to try and make it work. And you've got to try and get in the conversation if you're the Warriors. And people in the live stream saying yesterday, oh no, they shouldn't make a trade because it'll ruin the vibes and ruin the good energy around the team. And that is, I agree with that to a point. And that should certainly come into trade calculations. But if you've got a top 3, top 5 player in the world on the table who could be available, then I don't care about the vibes and the good energy. It's no, you just get the talent available because come playoff time, it's going to be about the star talent. And yes, the vibes and the energy, that's certainly part of it. I absolutely agree with it. I think it was a huge part of the 2021-22 championship team. I get that. But I think in this day and age of the amount of talent around the league right now, it is important to be able to match talent as much as you can, particularly come playoff time. The Warriors' vibes, good energy, that'll get them a long way in the regular season. That'll get them a playoff spot, right? But you've got to come playoff time, you've got to try and match the star power that other teams have. And if you've got Giannis on the table available, you've got to try and get in the conversation. Now, in terms of other players, before we get deeper into the Giannis conversation, like Jimmy Butler right now, I wouldn't trade for Jimmy. I wouldn't trade like Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins plus other stuff for Jimmy Butler. No, I wouldn't do that right now. I just don't think that's enough of an upgrade compared to the potential downside in terms of Jimmy's injury history, age, obviously 35, contract situation where he's on an expiring. He could leave for nothing in free agency, and if he doesn't, you're probably going to have to give him, again, upwards of $40, $50 million to re-sign him for, again, a guy who's got an injury history and he's 35 years old. Right now, would you give up Andrew Wiggins for Jimmy Butler straight up? I think you still would, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 12 months' time you'd look back at it and think, geez, we really shouldn't have done that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just been way too biased there. I'm saying you would give up Andrew Wiggins for Jimmy Butler straight up. I'm saying that you would do that right now. But I'm saying that potentially 12, 24 months down the track, given the difference in age, given the difference in injury history, given the difference in contract, I don't know. Maybe it's actually like maybe you look back at that and think, you know what, we shouldn't have done that deal. And Jimmy's making high $40 million per year, so it's got to be Wiggins. It's got to be other salaries. It's potentially got to be a young player like Kuminga or Bajemski. It's got to be picks. It's got to be a heap of stuff to get in the conversation for Jimmy Butler. And I wouldn't entertain that right now if I was the Warriors. Right? I don't think Jimmy Butler's enough of an upgrade to deal with the potential downsides of him. Now, Yanis, again, different conversation altogether. Top 3, top 5 player in the league. Just the tantalizing idea of pairing one of the greatest interior forces in the history of the NBA in Giannis with the greatest shooter of all time in Steph Curry. Draymond Green also there as a defensive force. Buddy Hield, sharpshooter. Like, it's the Warriors, I think, have the ability to get in the conversation, and particularly, I do think that to a point, Giannis might have to, if Giannis does ultimately opt out, and this is all, like, these are all what-ifs hypothetical at this point. But right now, Bucks are 1-6. They're probably going to be 2-6 by the time you listen or watch this because they're playing Utah right now, who we know stink. But if they want to get in the conversation, I think they can with the assets that they've got. But they'd also have to get Giannis to try and angle his way to the Warriors, and for Milwaukee to be willing to kind of say, well, you know what, you've done so much for this organization, you've done so much for this city, we're actually going to try and help you out a little bit. Now, there's a chance they don't do that, and they think, no, if you want to be traded, we're just putting you on the open market, and the best offer that comes in, we're taking that. It doesn't matter if it's in it doesn't matter if it's in Toronto, it doesn't matter if it's where you want to go, Warriors, Brooklyn, Heat. Doesn't matter if it's those 3 teams or if it's Toronto or if it's Memphis or whoever it may be, right? We're just going to take the best offer available. I think the Warriors, to help their case, they need Giannis to try and angle and request a trade to either them specifically or specifically a couple of teams, because I think someone like an OKC or a San Antonio or a bunch of teams around the league could clearly outbid the Warriors given their draft hand. The Warriors have a good draft hand. They've got all their kind of future picks except for the 2031, which is top 20 protected to Washington. Like, they're in a good spot asset-wise, but some of these other rebuilding teams can obviously, and a team like OKC, who have just, their asset management has been stupidly good with Sam Presti over the last decade, they're obviously in position to go out and make any possible trade, really, and trump almost anyone in any given deal. So we'll wait and see what happens. But in terms of a couple of trades here and what it would take to get Giannis and what the Warriors would be left over with is an interesting discussion, interesting hypothetical, right? So first one here comes from Josh Cornelison, my Fansided colleague who's been on this podcast a couple of times. He had an article for Hoops Habit looking at 4 different trade proposals. One of those was Giannis to the Warriors. So this was it, and bear with me here as I outline these, and I'll try and dive into them as much as I can, and give you an idea of, again, what the Warriors are giving up, and then obviously what they're left with afterwards. So the Warriors get Giannis, obviously. Milwaukee get Andrew Wiggins, Gary Payton II, Jonathan Kuminga, Kevon Looney, 3 first-round picks in 2026, 28, and 30, and then 2 first-round pick swaps in 27 and 29. The Wizards are also involved in this trade, a 3-team trade. They get Pat Connaughton, Marjon Beauchamp, and 2 seconds from the Warriors that are tied to Atlanta in 26 and 28. So, a couple of things here when I see this initially. First of all, no Pajemski. I don't think there's a world, any world, whether Earth or anywhere in the solar system, where Brandon Pajemski can be kept by the Warriors in the Giannis trade, and that he's not in the deal. Okay, the Jazz weren't willing to give up Lauri Markkanen without Pajemski. Why would the Bucks be willing to give up Giannis without Pajemski? Right, that's just not possible. Right, so I initially look at this trade and I think it's just impossible to me to see how the Warriors could keep Pods in a Giannis trade. They just have to give him up. They have to, in my opinion. It's that's what it would take, right, to get Giannis. And I've got another trade here in a second that I've come up with myself. The other issue with this is that I completely agree that it's going to have to be a 3-team trade for the financial reasons. The Warriors are about $500,000 or whatever below the first tax apron. They're hard capped at that. So it makes it very difficult for them. And then it also makes it very difficult for Milwaukee in terms of they're in the second tax apron, right? And they can't take back more money in a trade. So basically, neither team can take back more money. The Bucks can't because they're in the second apron. The Warriors can't because they can take up to $500,000 more. Otherwise, they go over the first tax apron. They can't legally do that, right? Because they use the mid-level exception on D'Anthony Melton and other reasons. So I look at this and think, yep, you need a third team. Kind of like, and I've mentioned this before, kind of like how the Timberwolves and the Knicks got the Hornets involved on the Cat trade that sent Randall and Dante to the T-Wolves. They need a third team. The Wizards are in this, and it makes sense from a Wizards perspective. Like, I can understand them being involved in this deal for financial reasons, whatever else, and getting, taking a flyer on Beauchamp and getting a couple of seconds, whatever. The issue for me from a Warriors standpoint is that they get Giannis in a 4-for-1 trade, and which is fine, but they're taking back $2.2 million less. So now all of a sudden they've got 3 roster spots to fill with like just $3 million. Like you can't do that, really. And so it gets very, very difficult from a financial perspective to fill out the remainder of your roster. Which is why I think the Warriors, if they're to get a third team involved, they probably need to do it so they get a couple of more players back rather than just Giannis. So instead of being a 4-for-1 trade, it's like, okay, 4-for-2 or 4-for-3, or I've got a 5-for-3 trade coming here in a second. I think that's important. Otherwise, it's going to be too difficult to fill out the remaining of your roster and find like legitimate rotation players. Because what you'd be left with, like in this, is like Pods is apparently staying, so it'd be like Steph, Pods, Moody, Draymond, Giannis, and then looking at your bench, you still got Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, Lindy Waters, Guy Santos, and who was Trace Jackson Davis, right? So they're kind of your 10 that you've got, and then you got to fill out the rest of your roster from there. So I don't mind it. I just think it's impossible to keep Pajemski out of the deal, and I also think it's very difficult to make work from a financial perspective, given you'd have to fill out the remainder of your roster. Now, second one I've got here in terms of a Giannis trade to the Warriors. The Warriors receive, and this is one I've just come up with, which I think is perfectly legal. I believe is perfectly legal. Warriors receive Giannis Antetokounmpo. They also, from Portland, as the third team in this trade, get Delano Banton and Duop Reith. Right? The Bucks. They get Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Pajemski, Gary Payton II, 2027, 2029, and 2031 first-round picks, 2026 and 2028 first-round pick swaps. The Trailblazers, they get Kevon Looney, 2026 and 2028 second-round picks from the Warriors from the Atlanta via the Warriors, and then a 2030 second-round pick. So let's just outline it from the three perspectives. The Warriors, they get Giannis, Banton, and Reith, give up 5 players, Wiggins, Kuminga, Pajemski, Payton, Looney, 3 first-round picks, 2 first-round pick swaps, and 3 second-round picks. This is throwing the kitchen sink. This is everything you've got. This is the entire future, right? The only thing you keep in terms of young players is Moody and TJD. Now, Moody is it's gonna be hard to involve him in any of these trades because he's on a poison pill contract. Otherwise, he'd be in there too, right? He'd be in there. TJD, I think he's not got a whole lot of value, but his contract is so valuable. So he would have some value around the league, but he's not obviously in the realm of a Pajemski or a Kuminga kind of thing. This is going all in. This is sacrificing your future. This is saying, we're getting Giannis. We don't care about 6-7 years down the track when Steph Curry's in his 40s playing golf somewhere and Giannis is 36, 37, who knows what he's doing. And, Draymond's 40 and doing his podcast, right? Like, we don't care. We are just going all out. 5 players, 3 first-round picks, 2 first-round pick swaps, 3 second-round picks. It's as much as the Warriors can possibly give up, right? And you know what? I'd probably do it. For the idea of seeing Giannis Antetokounmpo and Steph Curry together, which I think would perhaps be one of the greatest duos in NBA history, albeit Steph is 36. Yes, he's maybe slightly out of his prime, maybe, but he's still good enough. He's still an elite level. Like, that is 2 top 6-7 players in the league, right? That instantly, if those guys are healthy, that should instantly give you a chance. And I have enough faith in Mike Dunleavy Jr. and what he's shown in his time as general manager, that he can actually fill out the remainder of the roster with legitimate guys who are capable, right? So looking at your team after this, it doesn't really matter. To me, it's okay, we've got Steph, we've got Giannis, we've got Draymond, we've got Moody, right? We've got Buddy Hield. There's 5. We've got Kyle Anderson 6. We've got Lindy Waters the 3rd as kind of 7. We got Melton still as 8. I don't think I mentioned Melton before in the other trade as well, as he's still in the team. So that's 8, right? That's 8 already. Then you got the guys coming in from Portland. I love Do-Up Breath, right? I really love Do-Up Breath. I think he's a guy that Warriors should be trying to target anyway. I don't know, give him Guy Santos in a second for Do-Up Breath. He's the 4th string center for Portland right now behind DeAndre Ayton, Donovan Cling, and Robert Williams III. Okay, I'm a bit biased. He's Australian. I'm Australian. There's certainly an element of bias there, but he's a floor spacing big. He's only in his 2nd year. He's on a good contract, but he's 27, 28 years old. He's experienced around the world playing. And I think he's a really capable backup big in this league. And he's just what the Warriors need in terms of floor spacing. I'd be targeting him anyway. But I think if you can try and bring him back as an end of the bench, potential rotation piece for you, then that's it. That interests me. And I think Portland, looking at Portland right now, they can't be asking too much for Do-Up Breath because he's not that proven. He had a good rookie year, but he's 27, 28 years old. And he's the 4th string guy on their team. They've just got so many sensors on the roster right now. And then Delano Banton, he's shown some stuff. Did he average 16 points a game last season? Yes, on a bad team. Numbers inflated a little bit. I think he can take some of the ball handling duties in the 2nd unit. Now, Kyle Anderson would probably take a fair share as well because obviously giving up Pods, who's your backup point guard. Well, you still got Melton. I think Melton would start in this situation. So maybe you'd end up with Steph, Melton, Moody, Draymond, Yanis. That's great. That's elite. And then you've still got Kyle Anderson, Buddy Hield, Lindy Waters III, Trace Jackson Davis coming off the bench, right? With Delano Banton, with Do-Up Breath, right? Guy Santos, that's 12. and then you got two players to make up, which I think you could. I'm pretty sure I made this trade, so the Warriors are taking a few $1 million back less, so you could actually sign a couple of guys, right? I don't know. You tell me what you think. Tell me what you think of a team, of a starting lineup of Steph, Melton, Moody, Draymond, Giannis, and then come playoff time, 4 guys coming off the bench: Slow-Mo, Buddy Hield, TJD, and then one of Lindy Waters the third, Delano Banton, Duop Reith. To me, that's a championship caliber squad. That can win you a championship. And I think at the end of the day, that's what the Warriors need to be prioritizing in the remainder of Steph Curry's prime. And if you've got, I'm hesitant. I'm hesitant on Jimmy Butler. I understand the risk v reward here, right? And whether the potential. I'm with Mike Dunleavy Jr. Why make a trade and sacrifice your future when there's no guarantees, right? And you can't guarantee anything. This wouldn't guarantee anything, trading for Yanis. But it's the closest you could get in terms of saying, we know these two guys are a top 6, 7, pair in the league. Or sorry, both of them are top 6, 7 players individually in the league. Together, they might be the best duo in the league, right? And therefore, we think it's worth it in that situation. And for what it's worth, I think the Warriors, now, would they be willing to give up exactly what I just laid out in terms of 5 players, 3 first-round picks, 2 first-round pick swaps, 3 second-round picks? Are they going to be willing to give up all that at the end of the day? Obviously, their initial offers are going to be much less than that, but that is ultimately what I think it would take to at least get in the conversation for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Right? So, let me know what you guys think. Do you think the Warriors need to make a trade? Who would you target? If Giannis becomes available, would you do that? What does it look like? What does the team look like afterwards? How many championships do you have to win for that to be worth it? If you just, you make that trade, the mid-season trade deadline, and the Warriors win the championship in 2025, is that enough? Do you win one championship and think to yourself, yeah, that's enough? It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter what happens after that. With that trade is a success. Because you're essentially buying a championship, right? Does it matter what happens after that? Are you happy if the Warriors win a championship and then in those latter years, Steph's playing golf, Draymond's doing his podcast, Yanis might have left the team by that point, 36 years old or whatever, and you're you're a bad team and you're giving up, top 3 pick in the draft to the Milwaukee Bucks. And you're doing that a couple of times. You're doing that in 29 and 31. Right? Are you comfortable with that if it means winning a championship? I personally, following sport my entire life since I can remember, since I started to crawl, particularly from an AFL standpoint, Australian rules football, my team's won 2 premierships, but yeah, 2 championships in my 27 years of life. We've been to the grand final 4 times. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we've lost 4 grand finals. We've lost 4 grand finals in that time. I know how difficult it is, right, to win the ultimate, to win a premiership, to win a championship, however you want to call it. It's incredibly difficult. And so I always think when I follow my sporting teams, you give me, across a decade period, you give me the ultimate feeling of a championship or a premiership, then I don't care if you crap for another 5 years afterward. I really don't care. Because that feeling is like a feeling you will never, ever get in sport. And oftentimes, not to try and over-exaggerate here, but in life. When my football team won the grand final last year in 2023, it was up there, best day of my life. Because my old man, I followed Collingwood because of my old man. My old man passed away 5 months earlier. And that was, I get goosebumps even talking about it now. That was unbelievable. So if you can tell me that you're going to win, and again, there's no guarantees with trading for Giannis that you're going to win a championship. But I think it's as close as you could possibly get in terms of getting one of the best players in the world. And therefore giving yourself a real legitimate shot of winning. Right? And I think that might be worth it. But let me know what you guys think. Other than that, I'll finish it up there. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel and you're watching on here, if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. Much appreciated. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well, Golden State with Mates. Other than that, we've got Cavs game tomorrow. Only unbeaten team in the league. Kenny Atkinson is doing a great job with them at the moment. Going to be a fascinating battle against the likes of, that backcourt of Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, and of course the front court of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley as well. So it's going to be a fantastic challenge for the Warriors to see if they can back up the Celtics' victory with another huge win on the road against the only unbeaten team in the league. I'll be back for a post-game live afterwards. If you could join me for that, fantastic. If not, I'll see you on the next podcast episode.